My name is Ray Douglas. I'm here with a great lineup of people here to talk about all things relating to the youth sector and other issues, but specifically around the last 12 months as well as the future years and what it holds for the youth sector. First of all, I'd like to welcome Baroness Barran MBE. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for taking time out to come on this live and listen to the questions from the sector. So thank you, Baroness.
Great pleasure.
And if you don't mind, I'd just like to share with people, for those who may not aware with your portfolio, Baroness holds a portfolio for many roles, including civil society, youth and social action, government, including economy unit, loneliness, which is an interesting one. I'm sure we've got people from the youth homeless background here. Ceremonials, all DCMS, business in the House of Lords, culture, sports, art sector, and recovery from COVID-19. And I'm sure you understand when we say none of us envy you for that level of portfolio. And it's quite a task. So we're gonna cut to the chase. And as we said, this is hosted by the NYA, and they've given me the task of chairing today's session. There's a lot of questions that have come in. So we're gonna start, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
But can you share with us about why you came on today and what's the importance of these spaces?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I was really keen to do this when Lee suggested it, largely because I wanted to say thank you. Because I know that youth workers have done the most extraordinary job before the pandemic, but an even greater one during the pandemic, with endless challenges that none of us could have imagined thrown at you. And you've all kept going tirelessly throughout. So the main reason was that I wanted to say thank you. But I think the second reason was also, I just think it's important as government that we should be as transparent as possible. I'll probably live to regret that, but I think it's important that you ask what you want answers to, and we do our very best to answer. And if I can't answer all your questions today, I'll undertake to come back to you. So those were the main reasons, and also just perhaps particularly to thank everyone at the NYA and Lee for everything you've done and your colleagues have done. We've worked together. I think we were both having a glass of wine to celebrate the key worker status for youth workers being formally recognised. I know that's been a sort of lack of clarity that's caused problems in some places, but I think it does underline the importance with which the sector is viewed and the critical role that you play in young people's lives. And finally, just to hear from you as we emerge from this, hopefully there'll be a bit of time for me to listen, not just be on transmit, and hear what you think is most important as we come out of this.
Thank you for that. So we're gonna cut to the chase. So the first question is coming from a sector member, Darren Smith. It's around sufficiency and statutory duty and non-targeted youth work. So Darren asks, how are the government monitoring and holding to account local authorities who say they have and deliver such youth services, but are not actually delivering youth workers or services? I think, as he says, it impacts on real youth work and services and teams doing their youth work jobs effectively.
Thanks, Darren, for that question. And I'm sure you're all aware that we're doing a review of the statutory duty guidance, trying to make sure that that was fit for purpose and got the balance right in terms of accountability. But we have paused that because of the pandemic. And, you know, it's something that none of us are happy that we've had to pause, but we felt that was a necessary choice given the pressure that everybody is under. I mean, we absolutely see local authorities as key part of delivering youth services. They're the largest single provider across the country, but we also think partnership is incredibly important, and that's one of the things that we want to encourage as we go forward. And I guess I might talk about it a bit more in a moment, but we're doing quite a big review at the moment of youth provision and trying to understand what's happening where and where the gaps are.
Thank you for that. So I'd like question 2. I'd like to bring in Dan Barton. Dan's going to ask on behalf of Kev Henman from Space PMS. So fire away, Dan, with your question.
Oh, thank you. I wonder, can the Minister please to share current thinking on delivery in rural and shire areas, finding local accessible support services are scant or even non-existent in some areas, and just where isolation is compounded really for our young people.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and thanks to Kevin for having raised this originally. And you know, you make a very valid point, and somewhere it's pretty unfair that because you were born in a particular place means that you've got less access. And that's one of the fundamental questions that we're asking in the review, and also trying to hear both from local services and obviously young people wherever they live, but including rural areas. How can we address this most effectively? So at one end, obviously, everybody has worked with more digital content and online content, which in some rural areas is easier to access than in some other rural areas. But in most places now, it is accessible from a broadband speeds point of view. So understanding the role of that going forward. But also, you know, we're looking at things like transport barriers. I remember visiting Maryport in Cumbria, which is not rural, but is a pretty small town. And, you know, the youth provision that existed was effectively inaccessible if you needed public transport because of the time that the last bus left. So you guys understand better than me how complicated some of this stuff is, but we are looking at it in the round and hope to be able to address it, because something about equality of access is a pretty important principle, I think.
Thank you for that. The next question is coming from Milka Fasia. Milka is, along with myself, is one of the leads on the Equal Equity Programme, which is a partnership with ourselves and NYA around raising diversity amongst BAME communities in leadership, management and strategy. So Milka, would you like to share your question?
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to say thank you and good afternoon, Minister. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So just, I guess, my first observation is that there are several grassroots BAME organisations here with us in the room. So one of them is Power the Fight, which empowers communities to end youth violence, Resol, which focuses on homelessness, and Candy Arts, which looks at diversity in the media. So there's, I guess, 3 organisations from different sectors doing amazing work. My question is, how do we drive up diversity in leadership in all these sectors? Because most grassroots organisations, they believe that, you know, resources, opportunities, and strategic positions are being muzzled by big organisations that also do good work, but I guess a little bit different in terms of the work that they do in comparison to the frontline grassroots organisations.
So that's a great question, and I fear I won't have all the answers, but I'll do my best. So just to pick up a few of those points, so just so that you're aware, I have invited a small group of BAME leaders of different organisations following the death of George Floyd. I felt we just needed a kind of sort of safe space because, as you say, all too often people of colour are not in the room when conversations, or are very poorly represented. So I wanted to create a space where, if you like, the white majority were in a minority, and it's been very much focused on a kind of co-creation approach, and we've taken different themes at different sessions. And I think I'm right in saying our first theme was around young people. And so some of the things that came out of that were the importance of mentors, role models, all the stuff that you will be very familiar with, but making sure that we actually do it rather than talk about it. So I think it is important to, you know, for people who are running organizations, and by this I don't mean BAME-led organizations, I mean mainstream or whatever the right language is, please forgive me if I use the wrong language, that there is a plan for how you build a broader base, and there's a kind of talent pipeline through the organization at every level, and not, I mean, you need your representation on the trustee board, you need representation on the senior leadership team, but in my mind, that's not sufficient. And how do we broaden that out? And how do we give people confidence that this is for them and it's not for someone else? So that is wider work that I think needs to happen. And actually, you know, each organization needs to take responsibility for it, but in a small way. And I don't even know that I've stuck to this 100%, but I have tried to say that I will only talk on panels where people of colour are represented, not in a tokenistic way, but in a real way. Because I've got choice as a minister, you know, who I speak to, if you like we all do. So it's all tiny, you know, it's all those little bits that make up the jigsaw of equality. And then on resources, we did an interesting thing. And again, this isn't going to be the answer to everything, but we did some match funding as part of the funding that government gave to the charity sector. And one of our match funding partners was Lloyds Bank Foundation. And in that programme, there's been a particular focus on supporting organisations led by people of colour. And we've ended up in the whole grant programme with 45% of grantees being organisations led by people of colour, which I think is pretty unusual. And it's also been very interesting, and I think kind of quite grown up about the way it's been approached. So for example, certain rules that normally a grant maker would have, like, I don't know, 2 connected family members can't both be trustees, or, you know, those sorts of things which might have been a barrier to organisations getting funding. We're both giving them the funding, and I hope maybe some of the people on the call have benefited from that, but also working with them to understand why that might be a barrier to other funders. So that feels to me quite a grown-up conversation. So those are my reflections.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, let me echo that. And one of the things that we're aiming to do in March with the NYA is a conference called Momentum, and it's how to maintain momentum about the conversations pertaining to racial justice. So, you know, that's I'm really inspired by what's being done. But as you know, we're at the very beginning of a long journey. So thank you for that. So I'd like, the thing I like about today is that we've got representation from all over the country. It's not just London centric or just, you know, as it usually is quite often. So I'd like to bring into the space Lucy Metcalf, who's a youth worker from Sheffield. Good afternoon, Lucy. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Good afternoon, Minister.
Hi there, Lucy. You can answer it too if you want.
No, you can answer it. So using current lockdown guidance, we're able to support young people that have already been identified as vulnerable. However, I would advocate that open access youth clubs is a massive part of identifying vulnerabilities in young people, and obviously trained youth workers are able to refer and give information around services that they desperately need, including safeguarding. So I just want to know, when will open access be able to open?
I wish I knew the answer to that. So I think we would absolutely agree with you about the value and importance of open access provision. And I don't need to explain to you why, you understand it better than I do. in terms of when will it open, as you know, there's a huge piece of work going to be completed by the end of next week. And then the Prime Minister's going to make an announcement on the 22nd of February, which will be about a kind of roadmap out of lockdown. As you've heard him and other ministers say many times, schools are the #1 priority. And I think there is a genuine sense in government that it is better to come out slightly slower, but not lock down again, than to go through what we went through before, which was open everything up and then lock down again. I think there's a very great keenness to avoid a 4th lockdown. So I can't give you an answer, but there will be a bit more sort of sense of direction, and it won't, I don't anticipate it'll go into the level of detail that everyone on this call would wish, but what it will do is give the kind of criteria and the way that we will unlock as society, and then where youth services and open access provision sits within that. So we will, the team within DCMS will be working on that and communicating through Lee and others to make sure that that all gets fed back.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you. So next question is from, I'm going to be proud of myself now because I'm going to pronounce it right, Dr. Tanya Desequa. Am I there? Am I there and thereabouts? From King's College.
Beautiful, just how I say it.
Thank you. From King's College London. And you know, we can't have a conversation about youth work without talking about investment. You never can. The doctor would like to ask a question around the Youth Investment Fund, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as Ray said, I'm from King's College London and I'm a researcher here, and I have a background as a youth worker for many, many years. So support all the other questions that have been asked. So many of us want to know what's going on with the Youth Investment Fund. This £500,000 commitment was already too little and too late, and it's now, we understand, not only delayed but completely under review. And given your support today for open access youth work, and it's great to hear you say that you understand the need for open access youth work, there's really an urgent need for a government commitment to funding open access youth work, and not just this year, but in the long term over many years. So given this need, why does government continue to commit such a tiny amount of money to ongoing year-round open access youth work for 13 to 19-year-olds?
Thanks so much. So just, I'm sure it was a mistake, but just to make sure that we're clear on this, the Youth Investment Fund isn't 500,000, it's £500 million. So
yes,
just in case anyone was having a heart attack watching this thinking that we'd cut it by 99%, we haven't. That's the good news. And yes, it has been delayed, and the debate about the delay was really, you know, the aim of the fund is to support and drive innovation in the youth sector. And, you know, I absolutely accept many people on the call will not agree with this, but the view we took was that it was impossible to expect people to innovate at the moment because there's too much else going on, and that it would be better to hold it back. And we have put forward a small fund of 16.5 million, which youth organisations can use to meet, literally just fill the gaps that have been created in their income stream between November and March because of the lockdown. What we have announced is that £30 million of capital investment will be made available this year. And I actually just came off a call where we were talking about that. So we are moving that forward as best we can. It absolutely remains a government commitment to deliver on the Youth Investment Fund. So again, where I think you suggested, and I absolutely understand that there's lots of rumours going around, but I get lots of letters each week about, is this happening? And I reply, it remains a manifesto commitment. So it remains a manifesto commitment to do it. And the only other thing I would say is that we will have to make choices within this. And we are very keen to get, we will have to prioritize. I hear your call for more generous funding for open access, but there will also be, really understandably, a call for more targeted provision for kids at risk of, involvement in gangs or whatever it might be. There will also be those who will advocate for residential, there's, as you know, and one of the strengths of the sector is the kind of range of options for young people. And so we will have to make choices and we will have to prioritize. What I'm very keen that we do is that we're very transparent about that. And we also get as many young people as possible to contribute their thoughts, that in a world where the checkbook is not unlimited, where would they choose to prioritize money? Because I think we really need to hear that and give them the tools to understand some of those choices. So that's a kind of open invitation. We will be consulting extensively over the next few months. And the more you can help us in encouraging the young people that you work with to contribute, the more grateful we will be, and hopefully the better the result at the end of it. Tanya, did you want to come back in? You looked a bit uncomfortable about.
Yeah, I would love to come back briefly if that's okay. So I just wanted to pick up on the point about innovation, and you said that the money was delayed partly because it's unfair to ask organisations to innovate at this time. I'd just like to challenge that, because I think one of the reasons the Youth Investment Fund announcement was initially welcomed was that it wasn't so much about innovation, but more about there's been a well-known and proven need and wish for youth work, for open access youth work, and yes, specialist work for particular groups of young people. That's needed too, and I agree with you about the variety of youth work. But what's not been funded by government since 2010 has been open access youth work. Some of those other things have been funded, some of the targeted work, the National Citizen Service, but what has not been funded, apart from the smaller previous Youth Investment Fund, is open access youth work. And that's what we were excited about. Now, innovation, I'd argue youth workers always innovate, but I would suggest asking for kind of innovative, brand new project. That's what we want, is those grassroots organizations that Milka was talking about, to be able to do the work that communities want and need. And yes, to continue to innovate, to bring, involve young people and youth workers, practitioners in every step of those discussions, and keep challenging ourselves to do work in new ways. But framing it as a fund that's about innovation, I'd like to challenge. And I'd just like to say open access youth work has a proud history in this country and many other countries across the world of over a century. And, to build on that rather than something completely new is what we really need.
No, I absolutely understand that. But equally, to be fair, when the former Chancellor announced it, he did talk about innovation. So there is also something where maybe we didn't communicate it as well as we should have done, but that genuinely, you can look back at what he said at the time, was what was in ministers' minds. You may not agree, but that that has been consistent throughout.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask another question. The difficulty about this, it involves the B word, Brexit. Right? So tens of thousands of young people have benefited from youth work in Europe, traveling, exchanges. As you know, I know, Baroness, you have a background in social impact. I know you get it. What we want to do is ask someone who's really passionate about this to ask their question about in a post-Brexit era. So I'm going to invite Andrew Hadley from Momentum World to pose his question about international youth work. Welcome, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thanks for being here. Yes, I'd like to just broaden it out slightly to the international side of things. I think all the colleagues present would probably agree that international activities can provide one of the most life-changing possible experiences for young people, and that's a phrase one hears time and again. And it can also provide incredible professional development opportunities for youth workers. Now, it's obvious that youth organizations can't fund that kind of activity from their own core budgets when they're stretched to the limit for the day-to-day work. And the Erasmus Plus program and the European Solidarity Corps really provided the only significant source of funding for those kind of activities. And therefore, the government's decision to withdraw from those programs actually deprives these organizations of that source of funding. So the question I'd like to ask is whether you have any plans to create a comparable international program for the youth sector, and if so, what sort of consultation you envisage that there would be, and when could we expect an announcement about it?
Thank you, Andrew. So, I mean, we wouldn't disagree with you at all on the benefits of international programs. And we are just reviewing how we want to do it going forward. We just didn't feel that we were getting value for money following on with the existing programs that you referred to. So I'm afraid I can't help you exactly on timing, but we are looking at what our international offer should be, obviously in a connected but slightly different space. We've talked about the Turing scheme, which you'll be very familiar with. And absolutely, we will be consulting with young people and with sector organizations as we develop that. You know, I can give you my word on that, but I can't confirm timing just because everybody is so pushed. If you can tell us when the pandemic ends, we can, you know, everybody's under a lot of pressure still.
Yes, thank you. I think that there are a lot of people watching this space with enormous interest, both in the UK, but also the huge range of partnerships that have been built up, not only across Europe, but other parts of the world that have received funding from these programs. And I think everybody's very eager to find positive ways forward and positive ways to build on that level of success that there's been over the last 20 years or more years.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question has been sent in by Tim Howell, so I'll repeat it verbatim. So Tim says, what is the role of youth work in supporting recovery post-COVID? Tim mentions that youth work is a vital support for post-COVID recovery for young people alongside statutory services such as health and education. This will be particularly important for young people with increased or emerging vulnerabilities, including young carers, those with disabilities, young people who have experiences of digital poverty, which is an interesting one, or will live in areas of deprivation. For youth work to be fully effective, it is important for youth workers and those working with young people to be able to access training and development. His question is, will there be additional bursaries and funding available for the development of the youth workforce, including third sector organisations?
So I might let Lee answer the last bit of the question. We have just made more funding available to the NYA to develop qualifications and offer bursaries, but I'll let him, if I may, talk about the detail of that. In terms of the role of youth work post-COVID, I think that I guess the first thing is, you know, I'd love to hear a bit more from all of you on it, but I think that there's a kind of sensitive, and in fact, I'm just thinking of a youth worker I spoke to in the days when I was allowed to go and visit youth organisations, exactly the kind of conversation we were just having about open access. Somebody who through an open access youth club identified, and I met the young person as well, a particularly vulnerable young person, but and was able to get extra support for them. So I think there's a delicate balance between acknowledging the challenges young people have faced, acknowledging the impact on their mental health and all of the other issues that you touched on, Ray, as you read out this question. But I think there is also something about making sure that we give young people hope, that we reinforce the sense that they can achieve anything, and that the future is theirs. I am genuinely concerned that this narrative of a kind of lost generation is not helpful to young people. I think we have to acknowledge that they've had a really terrible year, and then, but also help them to believe that for the vast, vast majority of them, they have the resource within them and in their community to recover from it and use some of the experiences to positive effect. And as part of that, I think that there is something about young people being part of the solution as we come out of this. So, you know, to give you an example, as a government, you know, we have a huge opportunity in the environmental area with leading COP26 later this year. What is the role of young people in that kind of environmental challenge, which is something that we all know is very dear to their hearts. So I don't in any sense want to deny or diminish what young people have experienced, but I think it's incredibly important as adults that we believe in them to overcome this with our support and with their natural courage and resilience. And so that's just a very delicate, sensitive, and will be different for every child or young person. But I think that's a bit the part youth work has to play, is to also, you know, to be the listening voice, but also the optimistic voice, and to carry the tension between those two things.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Lee shortly, but to add to that, and you mentioned throughout today's session that, you know, the future we can plan, but ultimately, you know, we're bound by this pandemic. But I'm sure you'll agree that innovation is important. Cross-sector partnerships are important. So to add to Tim's question, also, how do you feel about, for example, youth work graduates working with the DFE to go and work in schools as part of the recovery? What's your view on that?
It's not something that I'm at all expert on. I mean, it seems to me that the more we link things up, the better. So in a former life, I used to run a domestic abuse charity. And the thing we did was train up what were called independent domestic violence advisors. And essentially their role was all of that linking up of the different services that someone experiencing abuse might need. So the more coordinated it is, and the less a young person has to kind of struggle to find out what services are available in their area, the better. Whether that is the right route, honestly, I just don't know enough to say yes or no. But what I'm guessing is the principle behind it is to make it seamless for young people to get support. And obviously, I absolutely agree with that. And
do you feel, in terms of amplifying our influence, when I say our, those within the youth sector, whoever dug in this fight, do you think there's a need for a high-profile minister for youth to champion professionals in the youth sector, etc., and which can respond to the holistic needs of the young people?
It's a bit. I have a bit of a conflict here, because I like this very much, and I think. I think that in a number of areas, you know, having a high-profile minister obviously can can help. I'm not denying that, but I think it's also important that, you know, the Minister and crucially the Secretary of State, you know, cares about these issues, and that the Prime Minister cares about these issues. And you've seen his recent appointment in relation to a recovery plan for schools with Kevin Collins. You know, I think this is absolutely clearly on the government's agenda.
Thank you. Lee, do you want to chime in and add to that?
I can do, yeah, indeed. I mean, in terms of the bursaries, picking up on the Minister's point around training, so that we've working with the department, we've secured additional resource, about additional £300,000. That's being distributed to local training providers and networks through regional youth work units and our own team. And actually, my next meeting, which starts half an hour after this webinar, is to talk about next year. So with the Minister's team. So, you know, we would hope there would be ongoing investment and support, and we really appreciate, you know, that investment. Minister, the one thing that I thought you talked about earlier was the review that's going on, the DCMS's youth review. I wondered if you could just talk us through the kind of scope of that review, what your hopes for that review, and how that process, how people can get involved in that, because there's a public consultation kicks off tomorrow. Was already kind of public. So I wonder if you wanted to give us, our audience, a bit of a flavour of the review and your hopes for that.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Lee. As a government, or actually even broader than the government, if you think about how youth services in their widest sense are funded, you know, is pretty fragmented. There are a number of different funders. We've talked a bit about local authorities, but we also know that charitable foundations, including, of course, the lottery, but much, much wider than the lottery, private philanthropists, the general public donate to charities. So there's a charitable end, there's a local authority end, and then within government, there are a number of different funding streams. We touched on the National Citizen Service, but also there's quite a lot of funding goes to activities. You might not strictly call it youth work in the sense that you would define it, but activities for young people through Sport England, through the Arts Council, and others. So step one is going to be, and I know NYA are going to help us a bit on this, is just trying to understand what's out there, who pays for it, what does it do, and how does it all fit together? Because I don't think any of us, if somebody has this clearly mapped out, please call me afterwards. But I think one of the barriers is that we just haven't had that transparency. So that's kind of, you know, the sort of hygiene bit, if you like, just understanding a bit better how much money is going in to what and where. And then importantly, coming from that is a sense of geographic fairness. So somebody spoke to me about one London borough where they said there were 89 youth organisations in one London borough. Well, I'm pretty sure that if you're in wherever our colleague was, who was in a rural community or a smaller, you know, if you're in Stockton or Middlesbrough or Darlington or Workington, you haven't got 89 organisations. So there's just something about equality trying to move. We probably won't be able to achieve it, but trying to move more equal access for young people and giving young people choices, because, you know, one person's football group is another person's, you know, art class or whatever it is. I'm so old, I, you know, barely can remember what you do. But so I think choice is in equality, choice, and then the how we're trying to do it is, as I said, by trying to involve as many young people as possible. So the consultation questions for young people were co-drafted with young people, which I'm pathetically excited about, but it's true. But I'm just not sure how often government does that. So credit to our team in DCMS and the youth steering group who we have doing that together. That's been really helpful. But I'm keen that we involve young people as well as providers every step of the way in the choices that we have to make. And as I said earlier, we will have to make choices. We won't be able to meet every need, but being transparent and having all that local input, I think will help us make better choices within the constraints that we face. And I hope also there's one of my absolutely favorite quotes, and apologies to those of you maybe who've heard me say this before, but was a TED talk that I listened to with a guy called Darren Walker, who runs the Ford Foundation, which is one of the biggest charitable foundations in the US. And he was talking about his life, and he's a man of color and is gay, and grew up in Louisiana, where he was in the bottom 0.000 point whatever % in terms of, you know, poverty and deprivation as a small boy. And he said, however, that when he grew up, he said, as a child, and I quote, he said, "I knew my country was cheering me on." And I think there's something, particularly as we come out of the pandemic, that young people should be feeling that their country's cheering them on and wanting them to succeed and giving them opportunities. So we're not going to solve every problem in this review, but I hope the tone of it will be that we're cheering young people on.
Thank you. I'm just conscious we've come into a close, but I just want to ask if there's anyone on the live stream or in the room who has a pressing question related to today's topic, then feel free to ask it. If not, then I'm going to hand back to you, Lee, just to kind of, in terms of the 10-year vision for youth work. You know, we're all living day by day, but without a plan, you know, we plan to fail. So, Lee, do you want to bounce back with that?
I might reflect your point, actually, and invite Catherine, who's one of our young researcher, one of our young people who's with us today, to ask her question. So, Catherine, do you want to go first?
Thank you. So I'm part of the NYA's Young Researchers, and it was set up by the National Youth Agency, and it provided sort of information and education about research, as well as a set framework for young people to follow. And from there, they could basically pick any topic they desired to do research about, which was really interesting. Our group focused it on green spaces, obviously, because there are so many opportunities for young people within green spaces, but also with the current COVID restrictions, obviously green spaces being accessed far more. Through our findings, we have found that actually young people feel that green spaces are very vital for their physical and mental well-being, but also they would like to get involved in more opportunities provided through green spaces and obviously organisations. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, how seriously do you find the findings of this research that has been created by young people?
Catherine, I missed the critical word. In your last question, you said, what do I find?
Would you take the findings, I suppose, of youth-led research?
Well, maybe we could put in a session for me and the team within DCMS to go into your findings in a bit more detail, because I think it would be extremely interesting to hear and understand more, if that would be possible.
Yes, it would be wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Well, we'll set that up.
Super. Thank you, Minister.
And by the way, it's music to my ears. You know, I mean, because I completely agree. And I think there are so many adults who would say it's been the green spaces that have kept them sane. You know, over the last year, it is being able to go out and look at nature that somehow literally keeps you grounded. So I'm personally very warm to it, but it would be love to hear in a bit more detail.
So you can guarantee we'll work with the team to set up a call
Great.
with those young people. They had two
Super.
research projects, one around the impact of COVID on young people and one around the environment and green spaces. So
Fantastic.
maybe both could come and have a chat with you as well.
Lovely. Gladly do that.
Super, thank you. So I think we're coming to the end of today's webinar, and it was for me to sort of wrap us up and summarise. I'm really pleased. I've been looking at the questions in the live feed. We've got colleagues here from Liverpool, Manchester, London, Wakefield, Derby, Hampshire, Devon, Newcastle, and everywhere in between. So it's great to have across the country a diverse audience. And thank you for sending in your questions, and we've been able to bring a few of them through. Big thanks to all our speakers for talking today. I wanted to highlight just two of our projects with you, which the Minister sort of touched on actually, which is there is the review going on, which the DCMS's review, and the NYA will facilitate and assist the sector to engage with that. And if you're not a member of the NYA network, go to our website and sign up today, because that's how you'll get all the information on the review straight to your inbox, and we'll be sharing the resource packs and the questions that the Minister talked about that young people have shaped. All of that is on our website and will come out directly, so you can get that information. But the review is quite interesting for us because it's sort of come at the right time in another piece of work that we do. Anyone who's been in the sector a long time will know that in 2010 the NYA had published a 10-year vision for youth work up to 2020. And it's quite interesting to see what that last 10 years has brought us in terms of austerity and all sorts of challenges. And the sector has risen and adapted and changed, and really done its utmost to support young people in those circumstances. And it was right that as we came to the end of that, that vision period came to an end, we wanted to come up with a new 10-year vision for youth work going forward. And we've got a public consultation on this at the moment. You can engage with some of the events, go to our website and you can find information on that 10-year vision. Our 10-year vision isn't rocket science. I mean, I'd say youth work's not rocket science it's a very technical, professional, specialist discipline that supports young people in a very unique way that young people don't experience. And when young people spend 85% of their time out of school, it is in the community in which we need to provide those resources and the support. So it's great to hear the Minister talk about, hope when we get the Youth Investment Fund through and actually looking at how maybe some of the Sport England and Arts Council funding or other sources of funding can also be aligned. It could be really positive, and we want to see that come through. But the 10-year vision was that every young person who needs it has access to the trained adults that supports them. I mean, that could be through your local scout group, it could be through a youth club, it could be through a voluntary project running in your local village hall. And as an organisation, we champion everybody who's out there trying to support that. We're kind of working on a principle of we're going to need over the next 10 years 10,000 new full-time professionally qualified J&C youth workers, and we need to invest in that infrastructure. And bursaries is a great start for that, and we've seen some of that. And actually other parts of support that we've received from the Minister and her team is around professionalisation of youth work, updating qualifications. So we're very grateful for that support. But we need to roll out and have a bigger plan. And then the mass investment that is needed. And no one disputes, even when I was meeting with the number 10 officials, that we have lost a lot of money, over £1 billion a year has been lost. And actually over the next 10 years we need to see that investment back in grassroots open access, targeted and supported youth work for young people. And I completely agree with the Minister when she talked about seeing young people and their assets and their strengths, and the young people are resilient. We have to always recognise there are some that aren't, and they need those highly professional support colleagues to be there. I think we get that. I think the world gets that. And report after report talks about the role of youth work going forward, and in mental health, in loneliness, all sorts of issues which I know are close to government, and youth work has a big role to play in supporting that. And then the last thing I just want to just touch on was the Minister talked about data. The lack of data, I know, drives us all mad, but we don't actually know what provision is where, what time of day it is, who it supports, how it's funded, the workforce. So the NYA's got its new national census, which will go live in the next 8 weeks or so, where we'll be mapping the whole of England with the sector. So we're working with partners from Scouts, Guides, UK Youth, others are sort of sharing information with us, so we can capture all the kind of rich data that is needed. Because once we've got that intelligence and got that data, well, then we can work with the government and other departments, not just the Minister's Department. We're talking Department of Health, Department of Education, DWP, around their Kickstart programme for youth employment. And we use that information to really help the sector and government work better together. So when you see that census come through your door, come through into your inbox, please make sure you fill it in. It will be quite a hefty survey, and I totally accept that there is survey fatigue out there. There's been so many reviews and surveys, but this is the big one. This is the one that will really help us capture all the intelligence that's needed. And all of that will feed in. And from our perspective, we have a 10-year vision, you have the data, you have the investment in workforce that we hope the government will continue to support with. And all that we can feed into the spending review in the autumn to actually make a larger case for youth work and to go forward, and that innovation, and as well as keeping those basic grassroots provisions supporting young people. So I'd just like to thank the Minister for her time. Get an hour of your time is precious, so we really appreciate it. I know you're a champion of youth work, and I know you're a champion of the sector, and I know we all wish the budgets were bigger and that we weren't in a pandemic and we could do a lot, get out and about, meet more, be in a room, have different conversations. But we really appreciate your time. Thank you to all our speakers. It's great to hear from people up and down the country with different challenges from international youth work, and we need to be focusing on making sure that's there. Our Equal Equity programme, working with Milka and Ray around how do we support Black youth workers and youth workers of colour into leadership roles, onto boards, and develop the sector through those. And we've got a role to play as a national body in driving that. We accept that. Through to local colleagues from Grassroots Open Access Youth Work, Dan and Lucy. And lastly, I just got to say huge thanks to Catherine, our young researcher. It's brilliant to have young people in the room talking to us as well. So huge thanks to everybody. And this is part of a series of in discussions that we've got. So please keep an eye on them. We've been inviting other just as eminent speakers to come and join us and to take your questions across the sector and get involved. We're on YouTube, so please click like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. I feel like I'm a blogger now, I'm not, but do those things. It really helps us. I think we were like 13 subscribers away from hitting 1,000, so I think that's amazing. So if you could do that for us, that would be awesome. And huge thanks to the Minister for coming. Thank you, Diana, and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you all. Take care.